괜찮나? 아이고.
When we interact with our computers, we use our mouse, keyboard, or even a touchscreen. We don't tell it the actual zeros and ones it needs to understand something. But wait, we actually do. We just don't ever have to worry about it. We use the concept of abstraction to take a relatively complex system and simplify it for our use.
In order to get our computer to work, let's give it some power. Computers have a power supply that converts electricity from your wall to something usable. There are two types of electricity: DC, or direct current, which flows in one direction, and AC, or alternating current, which changes directions constantly. Our computers use DC voltage, so we have to have a way to convert the AC voltage from our power company to something we can use. That's what our power supply does. It converts the AC we get from the wall into low voltage DC power that we can use and transmit throughout our computer. So let's talk about power supplies. I actually have one right here. Let me show you how one looks like. Let's take that right here. So most power supply units have a fan, which is right in here. They also have voltage information, which is normally listed underneath or on the side, and cables like this one to power your motherboard, and a power cable. Have you ever plugged one of your devices into the wall outlet, 5G device? If you haven't, you're really lucky. After completing this lesson, hopefully you will know how to avoid that situation. To understand electricity, let's use the example of water pipes. Our sinks have a faucet that's connected to a pressurized water tank. When we turn on the faucet, water comes out. This is sort of like how electricity works. When we plug an appliance into a wall outlet and turn it on, a flow of electricity comes out. If we added more pressure to our water tank, would more water come out of it? The higher the pressure, the more water there will be. When it comes to electricity, we refer to the pressure as voltage. So when I was on vacation, to my surprise, when I plugged in the 120 volt appliance to a 220 volt outlet, the power came bursting through and fried my charger. If it was the other way around and a 220 volt appliance was plugged into a 120 volt outlet, I wouldn't have seen the same outcome. I'll still be able to get electricity, but slowly. This would be similar to if a water tank was only half pressurized, it would draw water, but slowly. In some cases, though, this can deteriorate the performance of the device and cause damage in the long term. As a general rule, be sure to use the proper voltage for your electronics. We refer to the amount of electricity coming out as current or amperage, and it's measured in amps. We can think of amps as pulling electricity as opposed to voltage, which pushes electricity. Amps will pull as much electricity needed, but voltage will just give you everything. Look at the back of one of your device chargers. You might see something like 1 or 2.1A. Charging a device with 2.1 amps will actually charge the device faster because it's able to pull more current from a 2.1 amp than a 1 amp charger. Finally, the other important part of the electricity that you'll need to know is the wattage. Wattage is the amount of volts and amps that the device needs. If your power supply has too low a wattage, you won't be able to power your computer, so make sure you have enough. This doesn't mean that if you have a large power supply, you'll overpower your computer. Power supplies just give you the amount that your system needs. It's best to err on the side of large power supplies. You can power most basic desktops with a 500 watt power supply, but if you're doing something more demanding on your computer, like playing a high resolution video game or doing a lot of video production and rendering, you'll likely need a bigger power supply for your computer. On the other hand, if all you're doing is just browsing the web, the power supply that comes with your computer should be fine. All kinds of issues are caused by a bad power supply. Sometimes the computer doesn't even turn on at all. Since power supplies can fail for lots of reasons like burnouts, power surges, or even lightning strikes, knowing how to diagnose power issues and replace a failed power supply is a skill every IT support specialist should have in their toolbox.
Hi there, it's me again. You might remember me from the previous module, and no worries if not. What's important is that I'm here now. We've made some updates to this program to make sure you got the latest info on mobile devices. You'll see me again throughout the rest of this program, so keep your eyes peeled for me. Let's talk about mobile devices. Mobile devices are computers too. They have CPUs, RAM, storage, power systems, and peripherals. How are they different from a server, a desktop computer, or a laptop? They're special because they're mobile. They're portable and usually powered by batteries. Some mobile devices are general-purpose computing devices, like tablets or smartphones. Other mobile devices are optimized to perform a specific set of tasks, like fitness monitors, e-readers, and smartwatches. Mobile devices are usually very integrated. Remember the systems that we showed you earlier? The components can be taken out and held in your hand. Mobile devices build some or all of these components together in a way that you can't take apart. The smaller the device, the more integrated the components usually are. The CPU, RAM, and storage might be soldered directly to the device's motherboard. Very small mobile devices use a system on a chip, or SoC. A system on a chip packs the CPU, RAM, and sometimes even the storage to a single chip. Not only are SoCs small, they use less battery power than if those components were separate. Even though they're small, some mobile devices use peripherals. Smartphones connect to Bluetooth headphones, for example. Mobile devices can also be a peripheral. A fitness tracker is a standalone device, but it can also be a peripheral to your smartphone. That same fitness tracker might use a heart rate monitor as a peripheral. It's peripherals all the way down. Mobile devices may use standard or proprietary ports and connectors. You might need to have a specific adapter or connector for charging a device, or connecting your mobile device to a computer. Sometimes the physical shape or the intended use of the mobile device is a standard connection like USB batteries. For example, say you have a waterproof fitness tracker. If it had a micro USB port, that port will be damaged if exposed to water. So instead, it's designed with a custom charging interface that can be submerged underwater. Here are some of the standard power, data, and display connector types you'll find used in mobile devices. This is a USB-C. Next, we have a lightning adapter, then a mini USB, and a micro USB, a micro HDMI, and a mini HDMI, and this is a mini display. Because mobile devices are generally small and have limited access to power, they run operating systems and application software that's specifically designed to maximize their performance. We'll dive into mobile operating systems and applications in future videos. As an IT support specialist, you might be responsible for helping end users with their mobile devices. This might include setup, troubleshooting, repairing, and replacing mobile devices. Don't worry, we're going to break all this down for you. One super important thing, mobile devices can contain a lot of personal data. Some organizations allow people to use their own personal devices for work. We call this bring your own device, or BYOD. You should be careful to respect people's privacy when they bring their own devices to you for help. To know how to handle these devices, it's always best to refer to your organization's policy. Sometimes, instead of being plugged into a power outlet all the time, we want to take our technology with us. Mobile technology uses rechargeable batteries to carry power with the device wherever we take it. Rechargeable devices might have an external charger or removable batteries, or might have a cradle, stand, or wireless charger. Look at this phone. You can top up the battery just by running it with wireless inductive charging. Isn't that cool? It's also pretty clever technology. Rechargeable batteries have a limited lifespan, which is measured in charge cycles. A charge cycle is one full charge and discharge of the battery. When a battery is reaching the end of its lifespan, it may take longer to charge and might not hold as much charge as when it was new. For some devices, you compare the current cycle count of your battery with the rated cycle count of that battery type to see how much more life to expect out of it. You need an external power source to add power to a battery. This can come from a wall outlet, another battery, or even a solar panel. You also need a charging circuit that manages the power transfer from the external power source to the rechargeable battery. This circuit works a lot like a power supply unit, PSU, that we looked at earlier. It makes sure the input power is converted to the correct output power. Instead of using a large PSU, rechargeable devices use more portable power adapters, power supplies, or chargers. A portable power supply powers the device while also charging the battery. This might sound obvious, but you need to make sure that you use the right charger for the right device. Mismatching chargers to devices can damage the battery, the device, and the charger. A lot of chargers and power supplies use USB connectors, but you'll see a wide variety of charging connectors. Rechargeable batteries can be damaged by very cold or very hot environments. Don't charge or discharge rechargeable batteries unless they're within their safe operating temperature range. It's not just that a damaged rechargeable battery might not perform well, it can also be very dangerous. Batteries can swell, rupture, and sometimes even catch fire. Before working with a damaged battery, you should know how to safely handle it. When a battery reaches the end of its life, you'll need to replace it. Some devices will slow themselves down when the battery is getting old to make the battery last longer. If your device is running much slower than usual or shutting down unexpectedly, one thing to check is the battery life. Some devices have batteries that are designed to be replaced by the end user. Other devices have batteries that are very difficult to replace, like small laptops and mobile devices. As an IT support specialist, you might receive special training on how to replace batteries in devices that you support. Or you might be the person sending the device out for battery replacement and then returning the device to the end user. IT support specialists often have to troubleshoot battery life and device charging. The first step is to make sure the charger, the battery, and the device are all designed to work with each other. We'll talk about sending out devices for repair and troubleshooting skills in future videos, so stay tuned. For iOS and Android, there are also some things that you can do to make the battery last as long as possible. It's a good idea for you to be familiar with these things so that you can help educate end users on the best ways to get the most out of their mobile devices.
So let's take a look at the back of a computer again. Here we see lots of connectors or ports we can plug in different objects, like a mouse, keyboard, and a monitor. These are known as peripherals. Peripheral is basically anything that you connect to your computer externally that adds functionality. You probably used USB devices before. USB, also known as Universal Serial Bus devices, are the most popular connections for our gadgets. USB has gone through lots of changes since inception. We most commonly encounter USB 2.0, USB 3.0, and 3.1 in today's system. In the chart, let's pay attention to the details. Using capital M, lowercase b, /s, instead of using capital M, capital B to reference transfer speed. These are actually different.
I'm done.
M or B to reference transfer speed. These are actually different units. MB is megabyte or unit of data storage, while capital M lowercase b or slash s is a megabit per second, which is a unit of data transfer rate. People often mistake speeds of 40 megabit per second to mean that you can transfer 40 megabytes of data per second. Remember that 1 byte is 8 bits. To transfer a 1 megabyte file in a second, you need an 8 megabits per second connection speed. You'll also need compatible USB ports to go with your devices. If you connect a USB 2.0 device into a USB 3.0 port, you'll get 3.0 transfer speeds. But you can still use the ports as backward compatible, meaning all your hardware will work with newer hardware. The ports are easy to differentiate. Let me show you. In general, USB 2.0 are black, and USB 3.0 are blue, and 3.1 ports are teal. This may change depending on manufacturers. There are lots of types of USB connectors, and you can read about all of them in the supplemental reading right after this video. Check it out. Back to USB connectors. The most recent one is the Type-C connector, which is meant to replace many peripheral connections. It's quickly becoming a universal standard for display and data transfer. In addition to USB peripherals, you should also be aware of display peripherals. There are some common input standards to know. Most computer monitors will have one or more of these connections, but you might encounter some older standards too. DVI. DVI cables generally just output video. If you need to hook up a monitor or projector for a slide presentation and want audio too, you may be out of luck. Instead, you want to look at one of the following cables. HDMI. This has become a standard in lots of televisions and computers nowadays. It outputs both video and audio. Another standard that's become popular among manufacturers is a DisplayPort, which also outputs audio and video. In addition to audio and video, USB Type-C can also do data transfer and power. As an IT support specialist, you'll work with peripherals like USB devices and display devices a lot. Now, you'll be able to distinguish between the major types. Okay, now we've seen all the key components to get our computer running. The last thing we'll go over is how our devices talk to each other. We know how programs execute from our hard drive to our CPU, but how do other things like a mouse click or a keyboard press get sent to our CPU for processing? These are fairly basic devices. They don't contain any instructions that our CPU knows how to read. If you just clicked on a key from your keyboard, you'd only be sending a byte to the CPU. The CPU doesn't know what this is because it doesn't have instructions on how to deal with it. Turns out, our devices also use programs to tell the CPU how to run them. These programs are called services or drivers. The drivers contain the instructions our CPU needs to understand external devices like keyboards, webcams, printers. Our CPU doesn't know that there is a device that it can talk to, so it has to connect to something called the BIOS, or Basic Input Output Services. The BIOS is software that helps initialize the hardware in our computer and gets our operating system up and running. Unlike the programs you're probably used to running like a web browser or operating system, the BIOS isn't stored on a hard drive. Our motherboard stores the BIOS in a special type of memory called the read-only memory chip, or ROM chip. Unlike RAM, ROM is non-volatile, meaning it won't erase the data if the computer is turned off. Once the operating system loads, we're able to load drivers from non-essential devices directly from the hard drive. In today's system, there's another player for BIOS called UEFI, which stands for Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. UEFI performs the same function of starting your computer as a traditional BIOS, but it's more modern and has better compatibility and support for newer hardware. Most hardware out there today comes with UEFI built in. Eventually, UEFI will become the predominant BIOS. When you turn on a computer, you might notice a beeping from time to time. Our computers run a test to make sure all the hardware is working correctly. This is called a power on self-test, or POST, and the BIOS runs it when you boot up your computer. The POST figures out what hardware is on the computer, so it happens before the BIOS initializes any hardware or loads up essential drivers. If there's an issue with anything at that point, there's no way to display it on the screen, since things like the video driver haven't been loaded. Instead, the computer can usually produce a series of beeps, almost like Morse code, which will help identify the problem. Different manufacturers have different beep codes, so if your computer successfully boots up, you may hear a single beep. If you hear two beeps, it could mean a POST error. It's best to refer to your motherboard manual to find out what each code means. Also, you should know that not all machines have built-in speakers, so don't worry if your computer boots without a beep. If it does have a built-in speaker, being able to distinguish what the beep codes mean is an extremely helpful tool when troubleshooting boot issues. One last thing we'll discuss are BIOS settings. There's a special chip on our motherboard called the CMOS chip. It stores basic data about booting your computer, like the date, time, and how you want it to start up. You can change these settings by booting into CMOS or BIOS settings menu. It varies on different computers, but usually when you boot the computer, there'll be a quick screen that tells you what button to push to get into the settings. From there, you can change the basic BIOS settings of your machine. In an IT support role, you might interact with the BIOS more often than you think. BIOS settings control which devices to boot to, and in an IT role, you might need to change the settings more often than not. A frequently performed IT task is the re-imaging of a computer. The term refers to a disk image, which is a copy of an operating system. So the process of re-imaging involves wiping and reinstalling an operating system. This procedure is typically performed using a program that's stored on some external device like a USB memory stick or a CD-ROM, or even a server accessible through the network. To access these programs and perform the re-image, you'll need to use the BIOS to tell the computer to boot up from that external device.
The one great constant in the technology industry is its history of change and the speed of that change. So no education is going to give anyone the skills they need for an entire career. You've got to have curiosity. You've got to have a lifetime of curiosity and a dedication to a lifetime of learning, because the tools and technology that we use in this industry are always going to be changing. Great tech skills are really important, but the important thing about our technology is that it serves people and it serves the interests of people. You have to like people. You have to like helping them. You have to have empathy and sympathy for their problems. That is the most important thing. There's no corner of our lives or industry or government or society that IT and technology don't play a role in. And these are skills that don't just help you in your job, but they can help you in every facet of your life. And they're going to be relevant to everything that we do in our lives for as far into the future as anyone can predict. Try this program out. If you can learn this material, if you like this material, then you can have a great career in technology and don't worry about the other stuff.
Now that we've learned what the computer components are and how they work, we're going to assemble our very own computer, a full-size desktop. Computers are incredibly fundamental to the work of an IT support specialist. They're used in pretty much every aspect of the job. Aside from work, knowing how to build a computer might inspire you to try all kinds of cool stuff. You could custom build a gaming rig to play the most advanced game at the highest settings, or, like me, make a home media server for all your photos and videos. Knowing how to build a computer is a skill that can be useful in lots of interesting ways. Before we get started, let's lay down some ground rules for this ground-up build. Sorry, I can help myself. We should think about electrostatic discharge and try to prevent unwanted static from harming our very expensive components. Have you ever rubbed your socks on the carpet and accidentally zapped someone? That's pretty harmless. But if you do that to your new motherboard, you can completely destroy it. So how do we prevent static discharge? We can go about this in two ways. You can touch an electrical device that's plugged in, but not powered on. FYI, you should do this every couple of minutes when assembling a new computer. Another option is to wear an anti-static wristband, like the one I have here. Let me get it. You connect the end of the clip to a non-painted metal surface, like your computer, and then you strap it on to your hands. Voila, you're done. While we're on the subject of anti-static safety, I want to call out that when you buy computer parts, they'll come in anti-static bags to prevent accidental static electricity. Be sure to keep them inside the bags until you need to install them on your computer. Now, let's get making this computer. We'll start by laying down the foundation of our computer, the motherboard. Remember, there are lots of different form factors for motherboards, and you want to make sure the one you purchase fits your computer case. We purchased a full-size desktop case and have a full-size ATX motherboard. On the motherboard, there are lots of screw holes, which coincide with the holes in the desktop case too. You want to match up the holes on the motherboard to the holes on the desktop. Once you figure out which holes to use, screw in these standoffs. Standoffs are used to raise and attach your motherboard to the case. In this instance, our case has built-in standoffs. Let's start adding on components. let's start by adding our components in. We'll start with the CPU, so let's take that out of our anti-static bag. You want to be very careful with these, because they're very expensive. You don't want to drop them. Once we've taken out the bag, let's line up the CPU with the motherboard socket. Something to note is this marker right here. This has to align with the CPU socket on the motherboard. Also, don't forget to make sure you get compatible CPUs that fit your motherboard. We have an LGA CPU with an LGA compatible motherboard socket. So let's go ahead and align the correct orientation of the CPU secured in place like this. So like mentioned before, you want to make sure that the pointers on the CPU and the socket are aligned. The easy part is putting the CPU in. The fun part is securing this. Just note that when you secure the CPU in the socket, you do need to use a bit of force so it's tightly secured in. 2. Perfect. So now the CPU is secured in the socket. Now that our CPU is in place, we need to add our heatsink on top of it. The heatsink is used to dissipate heat from our CPU. I'll show you some cool things. This part right here, this is what our CPU relies on to stay cool. It takes the heat from there and then uses this fan to blow it out. Before we attach the heatsink, we need to apply an even amount of thermal paste. Let me get that. This is the thermal paste. Thermal paste is used to better connect our CPU and heatsink, so the heat transfers from one to the other better. To get started, apply a dab of thermal paste and spread it evenly with a flat object. Let's do that on our CPU right here. So the first thing that you want to do is slowly apply a slight dab on the CPU, like so. Then with a flat object, apply the thermal paste evenly to the CPU. So go halfway right here, halfway right here, halfway right here, halfway right here. Just make sure that it's spread evenly throughout the CPU. You may have to do this multiple times to get this correct. Okay, so once you have that in place, you're going to take your heatsink and then you're going to press it against the CPU. And something to note is these screws right here, they align with the CPU socket, so that can guide you while you put the heatsink on. Great. Once you have all 4 sockets aligned, go ahead and get your screwdriver and then tighten down the sockets. So one thing to do is to make sure that you screw opposite sides first, so you know that the heatsink is attached securely. So one thing I like to do again is just kind of go over our screws to make sure everything is tightened securely. Great. Now that our screws are tightly on and our heatsink secured to the CPU, you have to plug the small lens to the motherboard. This is important because this is what controls the fan speed via the motherboard. Perfect. So now you've fully installed and connected your CPU to the motherboard. Let's install our RAM. Locate the DIMM slots on your motherboard. So these are the DIMM slots like we discussed before. I have 4 slots available here. I have 4 RAM sticks. Let me pick those up. So my RAM sticks. Of course, they're my anti-static bag. Let's take them out. So as mentioned before, this build, we're going to use DDR3 RAM. One thing I like to do before I install my RAM is to make sure that I align these slots with my RAM slots. So that way I'm not going to be forcing those in when it's time to install. So if you see right here, your slots are right in the middle. So something to do is before I put it in, just visually make sure that you got this right and align the rest of your RAM sticks to the same position, like this. So I'm going to go like this, and like this. That way, you're not going to be damaging your pins if you pick your RAM sticks up and accidentally force it in. So now we've got that. We're going to put this in this slot right here. Line up the pins correctly and push in the RAM until you hear click. You know it's secure when both sides of the RAMs are locked in place. And there's something else you should know. Your slots right here are both black and white. We're going to stick to using the white slots. There's 2. And we're also going to put this one right here. There you go. You've securely fastened your RAM inside your motherboard. Next, we have our hard drive. In this example, we're using an SSD SATA hard drive instead of a HDD. We just need to use one SATA cable to connect it to our motherboard. So first, I'm going to go ahead and install this in this cage. This is going to vary from case to case, but this one's going to be easy. All we have to do is just slide it in like so, and normally you'll hear a click like that. Once that's in, we just need to use one SATA cable to connect our SSD to our motherboard. Let me go and get that. So here we go. Here's a SATA cable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this end to our SSD. I'm going to connect this end to our motherboard. There we go. It's in. Remember, SATA cables can only go in one way. So now that we have our SSD installed, let's go ahead and install our case fan. This is how this looks like. One thing to note is the small legs. You're going to go ahead and find a label on your motherboard that says rear fans. Not all motherboards have this, but in this example we do have that, so just a note. Those into the grooves. There you go. My fan's installed. And now I'm going to go ahead and attach this to the bullets. There we go. Now my fan is attached to my motherboard. For best practice, you want to create a wind tunnel that takes in air, blows it over your components, and then pushes it all out back. Check out how our heatsink has a fan on it too. That's pretty normal, since our CPU generates a lot of heat, and we want to help cool it off as best as we can. We're almost done. Now we're going to connect our power and test to see if everything's working. So let's grab our power supply. Here we are. First, let's secure our power supply to our case. Be careful not to damage the motherboard when you install it. What you're going to do is you're going to put this in slowly like that. And just slide it in. There you go. So one thing I like to do is I like to put my cables all the way up to the side, so like I mentioned before, it's not going to go ahead and damage the motherboard. So now I'm going to go ahead and start securing my power supply. So this one, there we go. As you can see, I normally like to go ahead and start my fingers, it's just easier to get in. And once I put all my screws in, I'm going to go ahead and use my screwdriver. Tighten that. So let's go ahead and tighten our screws here. Great. So now we've secured our power supply to the case, so it's not going to move anywhere. And just another note, you can also install the power supply before adding it to the motherboard, depending on how your case is laid out. Let's go back to our method connectors. There are a few things I would like to highlight. This big one right here, this is the one that powers our motherboard. Another one that we have, it's more of a legacy one, is this 4-pin Molex. These connectors were used heavily before SATA came out. Now, we use these connectors to power the majority of SATA devices today. Most modern machines today will probably use SATA power connectors for your hard drives, so it may come with Molex to SATA adapters. Now, it's time for the fun part. First, let's go ahead and connect our power supply to our motherboard. So that's this big pin, as we discussed earlier. Just going to go in right here. And plug that in like so. Next, we're going to go ahead and power the CPU with this 8-pin box right here. It's going to be pretty tight, but you should be able to get it. There you go. So what we just did was we have the power supply is powering the motherboard and the CPU. So now that we've hooked up the cable to our CPU and motherboard, next thing that we need to hook up are these cables that are sitting in our case. This is going to vary from case to case, but let's go through it. Some of these cables are used for your case's buttons and lights. So for this one, I'll plug these in. Okay. On another computer. But you figured out how they work individually, and then we built one together. It's quite an accomplishment.
Repairing a mobile device is different from repairing larger, more generic computers. First, there are thousands of types of mobile devices. There's no way we can cover all the differences. Instead, let's check out some of the tools and techniques that you'll rely on to keep mobile devices in your organization running. As an IT support specialist, you might receive training in this area and be responsible for repairing devices that your organization owns. Before you attempt any repairs, make sure you're familiar with your organization's policy around mobile device repair. Depending on the device, you may or may not be able to repair it on your own. But not so fast. Keep in mind that even when you can repair a device on your own, it will usually void the warranty. So, check the impact on the warranty before. With specific training, you might be able to perform some repairs without violating the warranty of the device. For example, you might be allowed to replace a cracked smartphone screen without voiding the warranty, but you're probably not permitted to replace a damaged charging port. If you're not allowed to perform any repairs, then it may be your job to send the device out for repair or replacement with an outside vendor or manufacturer. You should know and understand the Return Merchandise Authorization, or RMA, process for each device that you deal with. The device's warranty or the service agreement that your organization has with the device's manufacturer will determine how and when it will be repaired or replaced. Depending on the device and your organization's policies, you might also need to make sure that there's no proprietary or personal data on the device before it's sent off for repair by doing a factory reset on the device. A factory reset will remove all data, apps, and customizations from the device. When repairing a mobile device, follow the same best practices that we showed you for working on a PC. Protect against static discharge, use the right tools, keep parts organized and labeled. Taking pictures along the way can help a lot too. Follow vendor documentation, and test the device to make sure it still works.
One of my favorite parts of the program is just showing me how many different jobs have an IT department or use some aspect of IT. You can do pretty much anything. It's very motivating. The feeling of growth is an amazing thing. Having felt stagnant for so long, working at what I consider to be dead end jobs with no real vertical movement, knowing that now you can advance, you can put yourself into so much more.
So don't think about what you think IT is. Think about all the possibilities or the expansion that IT actually goes into. The program was great for me. It gave me more understanding of what IT is and all the different opportunities you can get into. And I can go into hardware. I can go into cybersecurity. And that's the best part because it's not just keeping me grounded to one level. I'm able to go further.
This program would definitely be the way to go to get your foot in the door, to learn and do more in this field that you're interested in. It has the basic fundamentals, it gives you the building blocks, and from there, the sky's the limit.
You've learned about the basics of computing with binary and the hardware layer of the computer architecture. Now it's time to go on to the next layer, the operating system. By the end of this lesson, you'll know what an operating system is and what makes up an operating system. You'll also get some hands-on experience with the 3 biggest operating systems used today. Before we get deeper into operating systems, I'd like to introduce myself to you. My name is Cindy Quash, and I'm the Site Reliability Engineer at Google. The team I work on is responsible for the management and support of Google's entire internal mobile fleet, Android OS, iOS, and Chrome OS. Before focusing on mobile, I was a systems administrator on the Linux team. Before that, I was an operations engineer. But like a lot of the Googlers you've met, and will meet, I started my career as an IT support specialist. I've been working in IT for 7 years now. The first time I can remember interacting with computers was in middle school, where my teacher brought them into our classroom so we could create fun video and multimedia projects. It was my brother who brought technology into our house. My parents were immigrants from Vietnam, and we didn't have a lot of money growing up, so we had to be creative if we wanted to play with a computer at home. I can remember spending hours with my brother as he assembled a computer, and he would just ask a million questions. Eventually, I wanted to try and build my own computer, so I gathered up some old parts and saved money to buy new components. I finally put all the parts together from what I remembered my brother doing, but it just didn't work. It turns out that I used some incompatible parts. Through a lot of trial and error, troubleshooting, and long search sessions on the internet, I finally got it to work. The feeling I got when I heard my computer boot up for the first time was amazing, and before I knew it, I was hooked on computers. I really enjoyed the intense concentration and problem solving required in IT, but I didn't think a career in tech was even possible back then. Once I got to college, I had to find a job to help pay for tuition, and that job was an IT support specialist on campus. That's when I realized that tech is actually something I could pursue as a career. Operating systems are an essential part of IT support. Everyone uses their computer to accomplish something, whether that's browsing the web, writing a novel, making graphics, playing video games, etc. Whatever the case may be, they need to interact with their operating system to do it. In IT support, it's essential to understand how operating systems work so you can help someone accomplish the task they set out to do. Whether that's figuring out why an application won't start, why the graphics look funny on their video games, or anything else. Things can get really messy and challenging, and that's part of the fun. So let's begin.